It was a bitterly cold Christmas Eve. Snow fell quietly over the small town, blanketing the streets with a serene, magical stillness. Inside a tiny, run-down apartment, 7-year-old Lily sat by the frosted window, her breath fogging up the glass. She wore a patched sweater, too small for her, while her feet barely felt the warmth of the thin socks she had worn day after day. The apartment was dimly lit by a single flickering light bulb, casting long shadows across the peeling walls, and the faint sound of distant carolers floated up from the street below. Christmas had always been hard for Lily and her mother, but this year felt worse than ever. The stockings remained empty, and the small plastic tree in the corner stood without decorations, except for a single paper star Lily had made at school. Its branches drooped, as though sharing in the heavy burden of the season. The smell of stale bread from their modest dinner lingered in the air, and the silence in the apartment felt even more oppressive. Her mother, Anna, exhausted from working late shifts at the local diner, sat slumped at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of lukewarm tea. Dark circles framed her tired eyes, and though she tried to hide it, the weight of their struggles had taken its toll on her. She barely had time to spend with Lily anymore, rushing between shifts and odd jobs just to keep a roof over their heads. The spark that once lit up her face had faded long ago, replaced by a quiet resignation. And her father, well, he had left them years ago, a distant memory that only brought pain. As Lily stared at the falling snowflakes outside, her heart ached for her mother. She pressed her small hand against the cold glass, tracing the outline of a snowflake with her finger. For a brief moment, she imagined herself outside, laughing and playing in the snow like the children she saw earlier on the street, their faces bright with joy as they carried home gifts wrapped in shiny paper. But she quickly pushed the thought away. She knew better than to hope for things that couldn't be. Instead, she whispered a quiet prayer into the silent room, her voice barely more than a breath. "Please, God, I just want one miracle. Please let Mummy smile again." Lily didn't ask for toys or sweets like other children. She didn't dream of grand gifts or lavish meals. All she wanted was to see her mother happy again, to see her smile the way she used to, before life became so hard. She wanted her mother to know that she was loved, that all her sacrifices had meant something. As the snow continued to fall outside, heavy and thick, a tear slid down Lily's cheek. She curled up by the window, pulling her knees to her chest, trying to find warmth in the cold room. The night was silent, but in that stillness, Lily held on to a fragile hope. Somewhere, deep in her heart, she believed that maybe, just maybe, someone, somewhere, would hear her prayer. That this Christmas, when everything seemed so dark, a little bit of light would find its way into their lives. As the hours ticked by, Lily's eyes grew heavy, her small body exhausted from the weight of her worries. She drifted off to sleep by the window, her breath still visible on the glass. A final whispered word escaping her lips before she surrendered to her dreams. Please. Unbeknownst to her, far beyond the snowy horizon, the wheels of fate were beginning to turn. The quiet prayer of a little girl on a cold Christmas Eve had set something unexpected in motion. Something that would change her world in ways she could never have imagined. Lily's mother, Sarah, returned home after her grueling shift at the diner, her feet aching with every step she took up the cold, dimly lit stairs of their building. Her hands were raw from the biting winter air, and her face, pale and worn, carried the unmistakable weight of exhaustion and worry. She had been working long hours, struggling to make ends meet, but the bills never stopped coming, and every day seemed like a constant battle to keep the roof over their heads. Christmas, as it always had been, was just another reminder of how little she had to give. As she pushed open the door to their tiny apartment, she was met with the stillness that had become so familiar. The apartment felt cold and empty, the faint hum of the refrigerator the only sound that broke the silence. The Christmas tree, though a small, humble thing, sat in the corner, its needles scattered across the floor, and the paper star still hung crookedly at the top. It was a far cry from the bright, happy holiday displays she used to dream of giving her daughter. And there, by the frosted window, was Lily, curled up in a ball, sound asleep. Her small form barely filled the chair, her face pressed against the glass, the light of the street lamp casting a soft glow over her. Her patched sweater hung loosely on her frame, and her tiny feet were bare, barely covered by the thin socks that had long since lost their warmth. But even in her ragged clothes, there was a quiet peace to her, a vulnerability that pierced Sarah's heart every time she looked at her. Sarah quietly closed the door behind her, trying not to wake her daughter, though she knew it was likely already too late. She watched Lily for a moment, her heart heavy with guilt and love. This little girl deserved so much more than the cramped apartment, more than the cold nights, and more than the empty stockings that hung by the door. She deserved a Christmas filled with joy, laughter, and gifts to unwrap. But this year, like every other, Sarah knew there was no money for gifts, no special meal to share, and no holiday magic to look forward to. Even a warm bed was a luxury they could hardly afford. Her breath hitched as she crouched beside Lily, gently brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. She gazed at her daughter's sleeping face, so peaceful in her innocence, and a pang of sorrow tightened around Sarah's chest. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking, thick with unshed tears. "I wish I could give you everything. I wish I could make everything better." She pressed a kiss to Lily's forehead, feeling the faint warmth of her skin, and lingered there for a moment longer. Sarah's eyes welled with tears as she thought of how hard her daughter had tried to stay hopeful, how, despite everything, Lily's spirit still shone so brightly. The thought of not being able to give her daughter the world filled her with a helplessness she couldn't shake. As she stood up to prepare for bed, Sarah didn't notice the small slip of paper that had fallen from her coat pocket. It was a letter, barely visible in the dim light, its ink slightly smudged by the cold air. She would find it tomorrow, but for now, her mind was too consumed by the weight of their situation. She pulled a thin blanket over Lily's small frame, brushing a tear from her own cheek as she gazed down at the child she loved more than life itself. Little did Sarah know, her daughter's simple, heartfelt prayer, the wish for just one miracle, was about to set off a chain of events beyond anything either of them could imagine. The ripple of Lily's innocent hope was already reaching out into the world, and, unbeknownst to them, someone was about to hear it and act in a way that would change the course of their lives forever. The Christmas they both feared would be their hardest yet was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would bring not only a miracle for them, but also a reminder that sometimes, even in the darkest of times, hope has a way of finding its way into the most unexpected places. As the clock struck midnight, its chimes resonating through the stillness of the apartment, a knock echoed on the door. The sound was sharp, unexpected, and unsettling in the quiet of the small space. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. It was too late for visitors, and she wasn't expecting anyone. 1,000 thoughts raced through her mind, none of them good. Who could be knocking at this hour? She wiped her hands nervously on her apron, having just finished cleaning up from her late-night meal, and glanced at Lily, still asleep by the window. Sarah made her way cautiously to the door, her steps hesitant, and peered through the peephole. There was no one she recognized. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door, her fingers trembling slightly on the handle. Standing in the dim hallway outside was an elderly man, his face gentle but weathered by time, the wrinkles on his skin a testament to years of hardship and experience. He wore a heavy coat, the collar turned up against the biting cold, dusted with snowflakes that clung to his shoulders. In his hands, he held a small, neatly gift-wrapped box, its colorful paper glimmering softly in the faint light of the hallway. "Good evening," the man said, with a warm smile, his voice steady yet kind. I'm sorry to disturb you so late, but I was passing by and felt I needed to stop here. May I come in?" Sarah blinked, taken aback by the stranger's unexpected presence. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to make of him. There were so many questions swirling in her mind. Why was he here? What did he want? But there was something in his eyes, something deep and compassionate, that made her step aside and open the door wider. "Of course," she said softly, still unsure but sensing no danger in him. "Come in." The man nodded gratefully and stepped inside, brushing off the snow from his coat as he entered. The warmth of the apartment seemed to envelop him, but his presence, quiet yet somehow calming, seemed to fill the room with an unexpected peace. He moved towards the small kitchen table, carefully placing the gift-wrapped box in the center. The box was simple, but the thoughtfulness behind it was undeniable. "This is for you and your daughter," he said gently, as though this gesture held more meaning than just the gift itself. "It's not much, but I hope it brings some light to your Christmas." Sarah stood frozen for a moment, staring at the small gift. It was more than she had been able to give Lily this year. She felt a lump form in her throat, her emotions a mix of confusion, gratitude, and awe. Who was this man, and why had he come? The apartment was small and humble, with nothing to suggest they had any connection to someone like him. "Thank you," Sarah finally managed, her voice thick with emotion. "You don't know what this means, but who are you? How did you know?" Sarah blinked. The elderly man smiled, his eyes twinkling with a quiet wisdom. "Sometimes we're guided by forces we can't see or understand," he said with a knowing look. "I simply felt drawn here. There are no accidents. You and your daughter have been in my thoughts, and I wanted to offer what I could." Sarah blinked, still trying to process his words. She felt the weight of his kindness settling on her shoulders, as if the stranger had seen through the walls she had built around herself, to the heart of her struggle. It felt as though, for the first time in a long while, someone truly understood. Before Sarah could ask any more questions, the man turned toward the door. "I'll leave you to it now. I wish you both a very Merry Christmas. May it bring the peace and joy you deserve." Sarah opened her mouth to say something, but the words stuck in her throat. She watched as he made his way to the door, his footsteps soft and steady. As the door clicked shut behind him, she stood there, holding the small gift in her hands, still in disbelief. For a long moment, she just stared at the box, her mind spinning. Was it possible that this man, this mysterious, kind stranger, was somehow sent to them? The timing felt too perfect, too serendipitous. Could it be the miracle Lily had prayed for? As Sarah turned back to the kitchen, she saw her daughter stirring in her sleep, still unaware of the visit that had just occurred. Sarah's heart swelled with a mixture of hope and wonder. Maybe this Christmas wouldn't be so bleak after all. Carefully, she placed the small box on the counter, the gift now holding the weight of something much bigger than just a material offering. It was a symbol of hope, a reminder that kindness could still exist in the world, and that even in their darkest moments, they were not alone. Sarah sat down beside Lily, brushing a gentle hand over her hair, and whispered a quiet prayer of her own. This Christmas might just be the start of something new, something unexpected. And for the first time in what felt like years, she allowed herself to believe in the magic of Christmas again. Lily awoke to the soft murmur of voices, the sound carrying through the quiet apartment like a distant whisper. Her eyes fluttered open, and she blinked in confusion, the warmth of sleep still clinging to her. She stretched her arms above her head, yawning softly, and then her gaze fell upon the kitchen table. There, in the center of the room, sat the small gift. Her heart skipped a beat as she pushed herself off the couch. her bare feet padding softly against the cold floor. It was the first thing that had caught her attention in the stillness of the night. The box was wrapped in colorful paper, glimmering faintly in the low light, and it seemed to shimmer with a presence of its own. She couldn't believe it. Had her mother somehow found a way to get her a gift? Had she saved enough to buy something, even just a little something, for Christmas? Magnus sighed heavily and closed his eyes. He felt cold, afraid, mortified, and humbled. Her breath caught in her throat as she rushed into the kitchen, eyes wide with wonder. "Is it for me, Mommy?" she asked in a hushed voice, as though the gift might vanish if she spoke too loudly or moved too quickly. Sarah, still in a daze from the stranger's visit, was standing by the table, her hand resting gently on Lily's shoulder as she gazed at the gift. A sense of peace had settled over her, though she couldn't quite explain why. She smiled softly at her daughter, her heart swelling with emotions she had no words for. "Yes, sweetheart, it's for you," she whispered, her voice thick with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. Lily's small fingers trembled as she reached out to touch the wrapping. Her excitement was palpable, but there was a tenderness in her movements, as if she feared disturbing the magic of the moment. Slowly, she peeled away the paper, each fold revealing more of the small, carefully wrapped gift. As the last piece of paper fell away, she gasped, her eyes wide with amazement. Inside the box, nestled in soft tissue paper, was a delicate snow globe. Its glass surface sparkled in the dim light, catching the soft glow of the street lamp outside. Lily's breath quickened as she carefully picked it up, turning it gently in her hands. She shook it softly, and the tiny flakes inside swirled around a beautiful winter scene. The snowflakes danced through the air, caught in an invisible breeze, as though alive with their own quiet magic. Lily watched in awe, her eyes fixed on the swirling snow, as if time had stopped. It wasn't just a toy. There was something magical about it, something beyond the ordinary. The way the snow floated gently, how the house seemed to glow with warmth. It made Lily feel as though she were part of something bigger, something wonderful. A soft smile tugged at her lips, and for the first time in what felt like forever, her face lit up with the kind of joy Sarah hadn't seen in years. The kind of joy that comes from believing in something good, something pure. It was as if the snow globe had awakened a part of Lily's spirit that had been buried under the weight of their struggles. She looked up at her mother, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you, sir," Lily said, her words full of innocence and wonder as she turned to look at the elderly man who had left the gift. "It's beautiful." The man, who had been standing silently by the door, watching the exchange with a gentle smile on his lips, shook his head slowly. He looked down at the child with a gaze that held both warmth and something deeper, an understanding that reached beyond words. "It's not from me, child," he said softly, his voice meant for you, long before I came here. Lily's brow furrowed in confusion, her small hand still holding the snow globe with such reverence. "But how? Who?" she began, but the man merely smiled, his expression kind and serene. "Some things are given to us when we need them most," he said, his voice fading with the quiet of the night. "And sometimes we don't realize how much we are truly blessed until the right moment arrives. This is your miracle, Lily. It was meant for you, and it has found its way to you now." Lily looked up at her mother, her eyes filled with a mix of awe and gratitude. Sarah, too, felt a sense of peace wash over her, though the meaning of the man's words remained a mystery. Before Sarah could say anything, the elderly man began to make his way toward the door. His footsteps were soft, as though he was already fading into the night. "Merry Christmas, my dear," he said, with a final glance at the two of them. "May you always have the warmth of home, no matter where you are." Sarah opened her mouth to ask him more, to thank him properly, But before she could speak, the door closed softly behind him. They were left in the stillness of their apartment, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft shaking of the snow globe in Lily's hands. It was hard to explain what had just happened, who the man was, where he had come from, or why he had left them such a beautiful gift. But one thing was clear. The miracle Lily had prayed for was not just a fleeting wish. It was real, and it had arrived in a way no one could have expected. Lily hugged the snow globe to her chest, her heart full, and whispered, "Thank you." Sarah watched her daughter, her own heart brimming with a hope she hadn't known she had left. The magic of Christmas wasn't just in gifts or decorations. It was in the love they shared, in the belief that kindness could still make a difference, and in the miracles that sometimes, quietly, found their way into the most unlikely of places. And as Sarah embraced her daughter, they both felt the warmth of something greater than the cold winter outside, a warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature, but everything to do with the heart. As the snow globe rested in Lily's hands, the room seemed to come alive in a way that Sarah could not explain. At first, it was subtle, just a shift in the air, a faint warmth that seemed to radiate from the very walls around them. It was as though the room, small and modest, was embracing them, offering a sense of comfort that they hadn't known they needed. Sarah looked up, her heart fluttering in her chest as she realized she wasn't imagining it. The air truly felt warmer, gentler, and filled with an inexplicable peace. Lily held the snow globe to her chest, her eyes wide in wonder. But even she seemed to sense the change. The flickering light of the Christmas tree cast soft shadows across the room, and, for a moment, everything felt suspended in time. The harshness of the outside world, the cold, the struggles, seemed distant, muffled, as though they were in a cocoon, wrapped in the safety of something far greater than just their little apartment. The elderly man, standing near the door with his hands resting calmly in front of him, watched them with a serene expression. His presence was quiet yet reassuring, and Sarah felt a deep, unspoken connection to him, as if he were a part of something larger, something beyond the realm of explanation. He smiled gently at them, his eyes crinkling at the corners with a knowing wisdom that transcended his years. Sometimes, a miracle doesn't come in the form of riches or grand gestures, he said softly, his voice carrying a quiet strength. Sometimes, it's the little things, like hope, love, and the belief that things can get better. His words settled into the room like a soft melody, each one resonating with a truth that Sarah had long forgotten. She blinked, the rush of emotions catching her off guard. She had been so focused on the weight of their struggles, so consumed by the constant worry of making ends meet and surviving another day, that she had forgotten what Christmas was truly about. It wasn't about the perfect decorations, the expensive gifts, or the grandiose celebrations. It wasn't about the things they didn't have. It was about the simple, quiet moments of connection. It was about the faith that even in the hardest of times, something good could happen. Something small, but significant. Something like the warmth of her daughter's smile, or the unexpected kindness of a stranger. And now, this snow globe, a small, delicate thing, was a reminder of all that. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, and she wiped them quickly, embarrassed by her emotions. But she couldn't help it. The weight of it all, her exhaustion, her worries, the loneliness she'd been carrying for so long, seemed to melt away in the face of the warmth that was now filling the room. She glanced at Lily, who was still staring at the snow globe in awe, her small fingers tracing the edges of the glass, as though she were holding something precious. The snowflakes inside the globe swirled gently around the little house, the soft light from the tree reflecting off the glass, creating an ethereal glow. Sarah's heart swelled with a love so deep it nearly took her breath away. It wasn't the material things that made this moment special. It was the love between them, the quiet joy of simply being together, of finding solace in the small, unexpected miracles that life sometimes offered. As Sarah stepped closer to Lily, she reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from her daughter's face. "You're my miracle. You know that," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You and this gift. It's all the miracle I need." Lily looked up at her mother, her face lighting up with a smile that seemed to shine brighter than any Christmas lights. "I think it's magic, Mummy. The snow globe's magic. It feels so warm." Sarah nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek, but it wasn't from sadness. It was from the overwhelming sense of gratitude she felt in that moment. She had been so focused on the challenges, on what they lacked, that she had forgotten how much they truly had. They had each other. They had love. They had hope. The elderly man, who had remained silent watching the tender moment unfold, turned to leave, his eyes softening as he looked back one final time. "Merry Christmas," he said, his voice low and comforting. "May your hearts always find warmth, even in the coldest of times." Before Sarah could thank him again, the man was gone, his figure disappearing into the snowy night, leaving behind only the echo of his words. Sarah stood there for a long moment, still feeling the presence of the man in the room, though he was no longer physically there. His kindness lingered like a soft blanket wrapped around their hearts, offering them both peace. Lily placed the snow globe carefully on the kitchen table, her eyes still wide with wonder. She turned to her mother, her small hand reaching out to hold hers. "Mummy, I'm happy. I think this is the best Christmas ever." "Why?" And in that moment, Sarah realized it truly was. The best Christmas wasn't about what they didn't have. It was about what they had found. The gift of love. The gift of hope. The gift of believing that, no matter how dark things seemed, there would always be a light shining through. With her daughter by her side, Sarah wrapped her arms around her, holding her close. The warmth of the moment spread through her, filling the empty spaces inside her heart. Christmas wasn't just a day. It was a feeling that stayed with you long after the lights had dimmed and the snow had melted. And this year, that feeling had found them again. The elderly man stood to leave, his movements slow and deliberate, as though the weight of his years made every step deliberate and measured. Sarah, still holding Lily in her arms, felt a sudden rush of uncertainty. Something about the man, something in his presence, made her feel as though he knew something she didn't, something that gave him the quiet assurance that filled the room. She opened her mouth to speak, to thank him once more for the miracle he had brought into their lives. But before she could say anything, he paused. He turned back to them, his eyes locking onto Sarah's with an intensity that made her heart race. There was something almost otherworldly in his gaze, a quiet certainty that seemed to transcend the ordinary. His voice, low and steady, broke the silence of the room. "You won't be alone for much longer," he said, his words like a balm, soothing and firm. The certainty in his tone startled Sarah. She blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. His words felt like a promise, one she had longed to hear, but never thought would come true. "There are people out there who care about you, more than you know," the man continued, his voice calm, but filled with an undeniable weight of truth. Sarah's heart tightened in her chest, a mixture of emotions swirling within her. The words echoed in her mind, lingering in the stillness of the room. She tried to process them, but it felt like too much to absorb in that moment. She had spent so many years bearing the weight of loneliness and fear, convinced that she and Lily were just two small, forgotten souls in a world that was too big, too cold to care about them. And yet, here was this stranger, a man she had never met before, telling her that people out there cared. people who would change their lives, who would fill the empty spaces with warmth and light. The man smiled gently at them, his eyes softening as he took one last look at the two of them. Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward the door, his footsteps quiet on the creaky wooden floor. Sarah stood frozen in place, her breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure if it was the strangeness of the encounter or the weight of his words that kept her rooted to the spot. But just as she reached out to say something, to ask him who he was or where he had come from, the door closed softly behind him. He was gone. For a long moment, Sarah stood there, still clutching Lily in her arms, her heart beating in her chest like a drum. The world outside seemed to be moving on as usual, the snow still falling gently against the window, the soft light of the Christmas tree flickering in the corner of the room. But inside, something had shifted. The air felt different, lighter, as though a weight had been lifted that she hadn't even realized she was carrying. Lily, still holding the snow globe close to her chest, looked up at her mother, her eyes wide with wonder. "Mummy, who was he?" she asked softly, her voice filled with curiosity and innocence. Sarah didn't have an answer. She didn't know who the man was, where he had come from, or why he had shown up at their door at that very moment. But as she looked down at her daughter, her gaze drifting to the delicate snow globe resting in Lily's hands, she realized that maybe it didn't matter who he was. What mattered was the message he had left behind, the promise of something better, something brighter, just beyond the horizon. Sarah gently placed a hand on Lily's head, her fingers brushing through her daughter's soft hair as she hugged her close. "I don't know, sweetie," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "but I think he gave us something more important than answers. He gave us hope." Lily looked up at her mother, her eyes sparkling with the same light that had danced in the snow globe. "Hope?" she repeated, as if tasting the word for the first time. "Yes, darling," Sarah whispered. "Hope. And that's something we can hold on to. Something we can believe in." "Yes, darling," she whispered. As they stood there in the doorway, the quiet snowfall outside casting a soft glow over the apartment, Sarah felt a glimmer of something stirring deep inside her. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced in so long, a feeling she thought had long since faded from her heart. It was the spark of possibility, the belief that things could change, that life could surprise them with joy and kindness when they least expected it. The elderly man's words echoed once more in Sarah's mind. "You won't be alone for much longer." It was as if the universe itself had reached out, offering her a lifeline, a reminder that no matter how dark the night seemed, there was always a chance for something better to come. And for the first time in years, Sarah allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the future held more than just survival. Maybe it held a family. Maybe it held love. Maybe it held a new beginning. As the clock ticked on and the night grew deeper, Sarah closed her eyes and let out a soft, steady breath. She knew that whatever happened next, whatever miracles lay ahead, she and Lily would face them together. And that was all that mattered. Zach said, shaking his head. With the snow globe in her hands and her daughter by her side, Sarah finally allowed herself to dream again. The next morning, Christmas Day dawned bright and crisp, the world outside bathed in the soft glow of a fresh snowfall. The air felt alive with the promise of something new, something filled with warmth. Sarah and Lily awoke to the sound of car doors slamming shut outside their apartment. Sarah, still groggy from a restless night of reflection, glanced at the clock. It was early, much too early for visitors. As she shuffled to the window, she paused. A small crowd had gathered just outside their door, their breath visible in the chilly morning air, their faces lit with smiles and anticipation. Sarah opened the door hesitantly, her heart beating faster as she tried to make sense of the scene before her. When her eyes landed on the group, her breath caught in her throat. Standing on their porch were several familiar faces from the community, neighbors she had waved to in passing, regulars from the diner where she worked late shifts, and even a few strangers Sarah couldn't immediately recognize. In their hands, they held baskets of food, wrapped gifts, and bags of supplies. The simple offerings seemed to glow in the early morning light, a beacon of generosity and goodwill. "We heard about your situation," one of the neighbors, Mrs. Ramirez, explained softly, stepping forward with a warm smile. She was an elderly woman who had lived in the building for years. She placed a large basket of groceries in Sarah's hands. "And we just wanted to help. It's the least we could do, especially this time of year." Sarah stood frozen in the doorway, her hands trembling as she accepted the basket. Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked around at the faces of the people standing before her. They weren't wealthy or powerful people, just ordinary folks, doing their best to survive and support one another in a world that often seemed too big and too cold. And yet, in this moment, they had chosen to stand with her and Lily, to give, to share in a way that made her feel for the first time in so long that they weren't invisible, that they weren't alone. Her heart sank. From behind Mrs. Ramirez, a young man Sarah recognized as Tom, a regular from the diner, stepped forward. He had a shy smile on his face as he handed over a box of toys, each one carefully wrapped with bright paper. "I know it's not much," he said softly, looking at Lily with a kind smile. "But I thought these might make her day a little brighter." Lily, who had been standing silently beside her mother, her eyes wide in surprise, reached out for the box. Her face lit up with a smile Sarah hadn't seen in what felt like forever. The warmth in her daughter's expression was like a balm to Sarah's heart. For so long, Lily had carried the weight of their hardships, her own heart filled with worry for her mother, for their future. But now, her face radiated pure joy, the simple gift of kindness, sparking a light in her that Sarah thought had been extinguished. "Thank you," Lily whispered, her voice barely above a whisper, but filled with genuine gratitude. The people standing on the porch smiled at Lily, their eyes soft with compassion. Then, Sarah turned to the man who had spoken earlier, a tall figure Sarah didn't recognize. He stepped forward, holding a large bag of supplies, clothing, blankets, even a few toys, and placed it gently into Sarah's hands. "We've all chipped in," he said, his voice deep and warm. "A little bit from each of us to make sure you both have a Merry Christmas. We know times have been tough, and we wanted to make sure you had something to smile about today." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she looked at the generosity before her. Her chest tightened with emotion, and she fought to steady her breath. She wanted to speak, to thank them all, but the words caught in her throat. How could she express the depth of her gratitude, the overwhelming sense of love and support that surrounded them now? As she stood there, overcome by the kindness of strangers, she felt something shift inside her. The coldness of the world outside, the loneliness she had carried for so long, seemed to fade away. In its place, a warmth blossomed, filling the empty spaces in her heart. The elderly man's words rang in her mind once more. "There are people out there who care about you, more than you know." And now, in this moment, she saw that it was true. The people in front of her had proven that love and compassion were not just abstract concepts. They were real, tangible actions. They were the quiet gestures, the small acts of kindness that connected people in ways that transcended all the pain and hardship. I don't know what to say," Sarah finally whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I never thought—" She paused, wiping away the tears that had blurred her vision. "I never thought there were so many people who cared." A chorus of voices spoke at once, each one filled with warmth and understanding. "You're part of this community," Mrs. Ramirez said. "You're not alone." "Your family," added Tom, his eyes kind and genuine. "We take care of each other here." Sarah looked down at Lily, whose face was glowing with the innocence and wonder of a child who had just received a gift far greater than any toy could offer. Her heart swelled with love for her daughter, for the small miracle that had brought them to this moment. And as she looked back at the faces around her, she realized something important. This Christmas wasn't about what they didn't have. It was about what they had found, the kindness of others, the support of a community, the love that had always been within their reach, waiting to be seen. "Thank you," Sarah said, her voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you all. You've given us more than we ever expected, more than we could ever repay." As the group continued to offer their gifts and words of encouragement, Sarah felt the weight of her struggles begin to lift. She didn't know what the future would hold, but in that moment, surrounded by these caring souls, she realized that no matter what happened, she and Lily would never have to face it alone again. Execution. And for the first time in a long time, Sarah allowed herself to believe that miracles could happen. If not in grand, sweeping gestures, then in the quiet, unexpected kindness of a community that had opened its heart to them. The Christmas miracle they had prayed for was not just the gift of a snow globe. It was the gift of being seen, of being cared for, and of knowing that love could still shine brightly in the darkest of times. As Lily sat on the floor, completely captivated by the snow globe, Sarah watched her daughter with a heart full of emotion. The tiny flakes inside swirled around the little house, catching the light in a mesmerizing dance, and for a moment, the world seemed to fade away. Sarah's eyes welled up with tears as she looked at the delicate snow globe in Lily's hands, a symbol of everything that had changed in their lives overnight. The simple beauty of the scene in front of her filled her with a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. Lily gently shook the globe again, her small fingers tracing the edges, her face lit with a joy that Sarah had longed to see in her. It was a joy that came not from material things, but from something deeper, a contentment rooted in the love they had for each other and the kindness they had received from strangers who had become something more. Sarah sat beside her, feeling a warmth fill the space between them, a warmth that seemed to radiate from the very air around them. It was a feeling she had never expected on that cold Christmas morning, this sense of connection, of belonging. The weight of her struggles, the constant burden of worry about how to provide, how to survive, those worries seemed lighter now, almost insignificant in the face of this miracle. She had never imagined that Christmas could bring something so profound, so transforming. As she watched Lily's smile, Sarah's heart ached with a deep, quiet joy. She hadn't realized how much she had longed for this kind of peace, this kind of security. The miracle wasn't in the gifts or the food. They were wonderful, of course, but the real miracle was in the kindness that had flowed into their lives so unexpectedly. It was in the strangers who had shown up on their doorstep, who had shared what they had with no thought of recognition or reward. It was in the old man who had given them the snow globe and left behind words that would forever echo in Sarah's heart. "You won't be alone for much longer." But what was lost? Without the possibility of being seen by another, and without the possibility of being traveled, the miracle, Sarah realized, had been the restoration of hope. That is what they had truly received that Christmas. The gifts were a symbol, yes, but it was the connection with others, the reminder that kindness could still be found in the world, that had given them the most valuable gift of all. A renewed belief that things could get better. As the snow continued to fall softly outside, blanketing the town in a serene, peaceful quiet, Sarah wrapped an arm around Lily. The room felt like a cocoon of warmth and love, as though the world outside didn't matter. Everything they had been through, every hardship they had faced, seemed distant now, like they were part of a different time. Lily looked up at her mother, her eyes sparkling with something Sarah hadn't seen before. Pure happiness, the kind that only comes when a child feels safe and loved. "Mummy," she whispered, "I prayed for a Christmas miracle." Sarah smiled through her tears, her heart full. "And you got one, my sweet girl? In ways we never imagined." Lily nodded, her little fingers gently cradling the snow globe. "I think it's the most beautiful gift in the world." Sarah kissed the top of her head and pulled her close, holding her tightly as if to savor this moment forever. "It is," she agreed, her voice thick with emotion. "It is." And in that moment, as Sarah and Lily sat together, wrapped in the quiet comfort of the Christmas morning, they knew something important. Miracles didn't always come in grand forms. They didn't always show up with flashy presents or dramatic events. Sometimes they came quietly, through the hearts of others, in the unexpected kindness of strangers, in the simple acts of love that made everything else seem less important. As the morning unfolded, Sarah found herself reflecting on the words of the old man. "There are people out there who care about you, more than you know." His words had been true, but they hadn't just been about the people who had given them gifts or food. It was about something much deeper, the love that bound people together, that brought them to help each other when it mattered most. Sarah felt that love in every gift, in every smile, in every small but meaningful act of kindness. It was a love that had wrapped around her and Lily, a love that had lifted them out of darkness. As the hours passed and the day unfolded with laughter and joy that filled the small apartment, Sarah felt a weight lift off her shoulders. They had everything they needed in this moment: each other, the love of their community, and a renewed sense of hope. The future was still uncertain, but in her heart, Sarah knew that whatever came next, they wouldn't face it alone. Lily, sitting on the floor with the snow globe still in her hands, turned her eyes toward the window and smiled. The snow had begun to fall even more heavily now, the world outside a blanket of white. It was as though the earth itself was joining in their moment of peace, creating a perfect, serene picture to mark the beginning of a new chapter. Her prayer had been answered, not with grand miracles, but with the simple, profound gift of love and connection. And in that moment, Lily knew that Christmas, in its truest form, was about more than presents and decorations. It was about people, about kindness, about believing in each other, and in the small miracles that shape our lives when we least expect them. And as Sarah held her daughter close, she realized that they had already received the greatest gift of all.